Okay, Rabotai, we're continuing Masechet Sanhedrin. We're on 46B-2 in the art scroll, and we're continuing in the halachot of a person who gets skila, right? We already learned that this person who gets the punishment of stoning, he's taken up a 2-story flight, he's thrown down, a big stone is put on him by one of the witnesses, and then if that doesn't do it, then small stones by the other witnesses and the rest of the people. And then we said that in specific case, according to the Chachamim, according to the blasphemer, right, the guy who curses Hashem, the Migadef, as well as that one who serves Avodah Zarah, not only does all this happen to them, but even after their death, they're then hung up on a piece of wood, right? So this is where we left off last time, and we said a mashal, why we don't let the person stay on the wood overnight. We said the reason was because the mashal of two twins, one of them was a king, one of them was a bandit, and the bandit was killed, and he was hung up. And then the king said, "Everyone thinks that's me, right? So it's embarrassment. So take him down." So that's why the pasuk tells us you have to take him down, because we are the Tselem Elokim. We have a face like Hashem, whatever that means. We're somewhat like Hashem, an image of Hashem, and therefore it's a bizayon. It's an embarrassment to have a human hanging. I didn't mention last time that it's actually a machloket rishonim, Rashi and the Ramban, right? Nachmanides and Rashi. There might be others as well. But does that apply to all people? Or does that apply only to the Jewish people? Rashi in Chumash says it applies only to Yisrael, only to the Jewish people. Whereas the Ramban, Nachmanides, who is more Kabbalistic than Rashi, right? And he says, no, it applies to everyone, including the non-Jews. So it is a machloket rishonim. So continues now on 46b-2. This is where we're continuing. Amar Rabbi Meir, my mashma. What does this mean? We had in the Mishnah, if you take a look back, the Mishnah said that when the Rasha is killed, Hashem says he's in pain. Hashem says that he feels the tsar, right? And if you take a look back on 46a-3, Amar Rabbi Meir, b'shasha adam mitzta'er, Shechina ma lashon omer. What does the Shechina say? Shechina says, Kalani miroshi, Kalani mizroi. I am burdened by my head. I am burdened by my arm. My head and my arm, I'm burdened by them. Right? And the Mishnah said, if that's by a Rasha, how much more so by a tzaddik? Right? So the question now is, where did Rabbi Meir get this from in the Mishnah? Where did he get it in the pasuk that Hashem is in pain? So my mashma, how does he see it in the pasuk, Rabbi Meir? Where does he see it? So Amar Abaya says, Keman de Omar Kal late. As if the one who says, if Hashem said Kal late, the word Kililat, right, could be read Kal late, which means I am not light. Hashem is saying I am not light, which means if I'm not light, that means I am heavy. That's the implication, right? It's the inference from that. So I am not light. Kal late. Amar the Rava says in Cain, if that was the case, then let the Mishnah say Kaved alai roshi, my head is heavy. Kaved alai zroi. If you're saying it means kal late, I'm not light, and the Mishnah should say, I am heavy in my head, I am heavy in my arm. And that's not what the Mishnah says. The Mishnah says, Kalani miroshi, my head is hurting me, my arm is hurting me. It doesn't say it's heavy. So Elam Ravam, Kamanda Omar Killi Alma. It's like the one who's saying the world is too light for me. And not that he's saying I am light, or I'm not light, I'm heavy. He's saying the world is too light for me. Saying it, as a euphemism, what he really means is the world is too heavy for him. And that's why it says it's a burden. Anyway, it's a grammatical Gemara of how do you see it from the word kililat. The Kitzer, in the end, the word kililat, somehow Rabbi Meir saw, whether it be kalet, whether it be kili, he saw from there a remez, an allusion that Hashem is in pain when this happens. So now the Gemara says, but how can you do this? Because we already used the word kililat last week to tell us that only a person who curses Hashem or a person who serves with a zar, which is similar to cursing Hashem, that's the person that you hang. And that's the word we use, kililat. We use this for this own. We use this word for a different teaching. So Gemara says, in Cain, if you wanted to use that word for just to teach us that the person who curses is the person who serves with a zar, that he gets hanged, my kililat it should have just said Nimikra Mikalel. Say Mikalel. Mikalel means someone who curses. Why use the word Kililat, a stranger, different, slightly different word? And if you think 1 second, Kilat only means to teach that Hashem is in pain, right? And not to teach that only a person who curses to serve the Tsar gets hung after he's stoned. Maybe it just means that Hashem is in pain when it happens. In Cain, name a kra, Kilat. It should have said Kilat. My Kililat. What is the word Kililat? Kilat means someone who curses. Kililat is an extra lam in there. Shema mino tarte. So now you can learn two from there. So we use the word Kililat to teach us that only a person who curses or serves the Zara gets hung after being stoned. And we learn from there that when the person gets executed, Hashem is, so to speak, in pain. Now, the Mishnah said you're not allowed to leave him overnight, right? And the Mishnah said not only this case, not only the person who is executed can be left overnight unburied, rather everyone needs to get buried right away. So continues the Gemara. Rabbi Yochanan says in the name of Shin Bar Yochai, Minayin lemeilin et meitosha over labelo ta'aseh. How do we know that if a person leaves over a dead body, he is over a lo ta'aseh? He's over in a lav in the Torah. Torah says, don't leave over the dead body. How do we know this? Talmud Loimer, because the pasuk says, Ki kavor tikberenu. You shall surely bury them. A double lashon. Mikan, from here we learn, the melin it meito sh'ar lo ta'aseh, that you are over a lav. Don't do something when you leave over a dead body. Now, the truth is, this Gemara is very interesting because a lo ta'aseh means the Torah says don't do something. And here the Torah didn't say don't do something. The Torah just said ki kavor tikberenu, when you will bury, right? It doesn't say lo ta'aseh. So the Aruch HaNer asks this question. Now the Aruch HaNer gives his own answer, but there's another girsa, another version found in the Yalkut Shimoni. And there it says, how do you know that you're over an aseh and a lo ta'aseh? So there he says, the pasuk begins, lo talin nivlato, right? It says, don't, lo talin nivlato, don't leave over the dead body. Ki kavor tikberenu. So in there you have both an aseh. The aseh is ki kavor tikberenu, which is what our Gemara brings. And the lo ta'aseh, the first part of the pasuk is lo talin nivlato. Do not hang the body al ha'etz on the wood. So there is a lo ta'aseh. The Aruch HaNer's answer is a little different. Aruch HaNer says that from the aseh you can learn the lo ta'aseh. From the positive you can learn the negative. All right. Anyway, so you see, you have to bury the body. Ikad Amrei. There are those who say, Amar Rabbi Yochanan Meshum Yochai. Remez likvura min haTorah minayin. How do we know that there is an illusion? The Gemara is a very interesting lashon, a very interesting language. It doesn't say how do you know there's a mitzvah. It says, how do you know there's an allusion to burying a dead body into the ground from the Torah? Talmud Leimer, the pasuk says, Ki kavor tikberenu, when you bury. Mikan, from here we see remes likvura min haTorah. Here we see an allusion to burial from the Torah. So listen to this next Gemara. Amar le Shavar Malka le Rav Chama. Shavar Malka, or Shapur Malka, Shapur the king. He was a Persian king. This is Persia before the rise of Islam, right? What's important to know that is because in a minute we're going to talk what question he asks and where he's coming from. But he was also known to be a wise king, a benevolent king. He tried to be nice to the Jews. He had a lot of discussions with the Jewish sages. So listen what he says. Shapur Malka asks Rav Chama, how do you know from the Torah you have to bury in the earth, in the land? Ishtik. Rav Chama was quiet and he didn't give him any answer. Rav Chama didn't have an answer for him. Rav Chama didn't have an answer from the Torah that says you have to bury the dead in the ground. So when Rav Acha Bar Yaakov heard this, Rav Acha Bar Yaakov, the world was given over to fools. Because Rav Chama doesn't have an answer. He's a fool. How he doesn't answer the Shapur Malka? The Baila the Maimer, because he should have said Ki Kavor, where it says in the pasuk you should bury. Pasuk that we're dealing with. It says you shall bury. That means you shall bury in the ground. So the Gemara answers, Rav Chama didn't say this. Why? Because maybe all what the pasuk means is to put it in a coffin. Ki Kavor, when it means to bury, it means to conceal, to hide, to close. So maybe you would think all you have to do is put it in a box. And once you put it in a box, you're good. The pasuk doesn't say ki kavor tikberenu ba'aretz. It doesn't say ki kavor tikberenu ba'adama. It doesn't say that. So that pasuk just says to conceal it. Maybe a box would be sufficient. Now, why is Shapur Malka asking this? Or those who want to say that the Persian religion prior to Islam was a magical religion, right? It was known like Zoroastrian or something like that. And if I'm reading it correctly. And they believe, an interesting belief that they had was that putting dead bodies into the ground was not good, was not a good thing. It contaminated the ground, it defiled the ground, it made agriculture not work well. And they didn't want to bury bodies into the ground. In fact, at certain periods in the Persian rule, they actually exhumed dead bodies from the ground. They took them out, burned them, whatever else they wanted to do with them. But they wouldn't keep them in the ground because they believed it was the wrong thing to do. So therefore, Shapur Malka is asking Rav Chama, listen, I see you Jews are doing this. What's your reasoning? I don't see it in the Torah. So Rav Chama doesn't answer. Rav Chama says, I don't have an answer because Ki Kavor could just be read as putting it in an Aron. So says the Gemara, he should have said, Ki Kavor Tikberenu. It says it twice. Ki Kavor, when you bury, you shall bury. So you see, it means you put it into the ground, not just concealing it in the box, but putting it into the ground as well. So loy mashmalei. The Gemara says King Shapur would not have listened to this. A double lashon. Chacham can use it on us Jews. There's a double lashon. You can't tell a Goyish king, oh, it says it twice. Ki Kavor Tikberenu. That's why you have to bury it into the ground. So the Gemara says V'nema midukvar tzadike. So maybe he should have taught him, what does it talk about our avos, our Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov? It says in the Torah that they were buried in the ground. So that should be sufficient proof. That should be sufficient proof. So what does he say? Minhaga be'alma. No, Shapur Malka would have said that the avos being buried in the ground, that was what the custom was in the day. That was the custom of the day, and that's why they did it. But not because the Torah mandates it. The fact that the Torah says that Hashem buried Moshe, that should be sufficient proof that you have to bury in the ground. The Gemara says again, no. Shapur Malka would say, no, that's just the custom of the day, the custom of the time was to be buried in the ground. And so he was buried in the ground. But nowhere does it say you have to be buried in the ground. There's no halacha like that. Tashma. They want to make another attempt to figure out the answer. The Safadulo Ko Yisrael the Kabaru Oto. Okay, there's a pasuk. This pasuk is in Malachim. Right, this is a famous story. I think a lot of people know this story. Yeravam, right? Yeravam was this Beit Talmud Chacham, was arguing with Shlomo HaMelech. Shlomo HaMelech dies. He splits off and makes a 10 kingdom in the north of Israel, right? And the 10 Malachim, 10 tribes, 10 Shvatim follow him, and he establishes 2 golden calves and says, "These are your gods, Israel." And he not only does that, he closes off the borders between the north and the south, and doesn't let people go to be Ola Regal on Yom Tov to go up to Jerusalem on the holiday. He closes it off. He has one son, Avia. Avia is one of his sons, and he was the head of a whole army battalion. And he calls off the guards and says, "Let them pass. Let the roads be open." He lets people through. He himself, or either he himself goes with people, and he gets sick. The son gets sick. So Yeravam wants to find out what's going to be with his son. So he disguises his wife. He says his wife to disguise herself and to go to Achia Hashiloni, one of the Nevi'im, on in the side of Judah, on the 2 tribe side, right? So he sends his wife, oldest guys, to go and ask a question to Achia Shiloni, the Navi, to find out what's going to be with his son. And Achia Shiloni tells him, I know who you are. He tells his wife, I know who you are. You're the wife of a Yeravam. And you should know that, all your children are going to be killed, and they're not going to be buried, and they're not going to have any eulogies for them. But your one son, this Avia, the one you're coming to ask the question, the one who's sick, he will get a eulogy, and he will be buried. And he'll be buried in the ground. So maybe this is proof that he's buried in the ground. So the Gemara says, no. Maybe the reason why Achia Shlomi said that Avia will be buried into the ground was because that was the custom. And there's no proof that it's a requirement. Okay, I'll try another proof now. This is the Navi Yirmiyahu talking to, I believe, his hometown of Anatot, and they were bad people, and they're going to die. Right? And he says, not only you're going to die, well, yispidu, they're not going to make a hesped, not going to make eulogies for you. Well, yikaveru, and they're not going to bury you. You're going to be like excrement, like number 2 that's on the ground. It's just going to be there on the earth. You're not going to go inside. So you see from here, it's a bad thing not to be buried. You would want to be buried. So you see, you be buried in the ground. You need to be buried in the ground. The Gemara says, no. Again, we're just saying it's a custom, but there is no actual requirement. So anyone want to take a venture or guess? What's the halacha? Does a person have to be buried in the ground or not? Can you just put him in a coffin?
Moshe Misinai.
Say again?
Moshe Misinai.
Moshe Messinai. So interestingly enough, the Rambam, Maimonides, and this is what the Shulchan Aruch passes as well, the Rambam says from this Gemara, he sees it's a mitzvah min haTorah. He says it's a mitzvah min haTorah to be buried in the ground. Although our Gemara seems to say it can't find an actual requirement for it, but he's learning like those who says, like the beginning of the Gemara when we started, Yochanan said, this is a remez with Kvura min haTorah from the word kikavor. And so the Rambam, he lists this as being a mitzvah min haTorah. How are you supposed to be buried in the ground? The best way, halacha says, is to be buried completely in the ground, without a coffin, without a box. Apparently, some lands, I believe they say in America that they don't let you put it directly in the ground. So there is room to put it in a coffin if you're putting it in the ground. In the ancient days, I heard that there used to be, when they had to do it in a coffin, either they had a trap door, so when they put it down, then they would release the bottom, so now the body would be to the ground. Or in some places, they made holes in the coffins, so that when it went down, it was still somewhat connected to the earth. Anyone know procedure today, how it works? Anyone saw? Okay. I'm not sure how they bury today in America. I believe it's just in the coffin. That's what they were telling me on Shabbos. They make holes. They don't let you open the bottom. It's just straight in the coffin into the ground, which is halachically okay because the body is in the ground now, right? But preferably, I believe in Eretz Yisrael, they don't put it in the coffin. They just put it straight into the ground. That's the best way that the halacha says to bury the dead. Okay, now the question is, why are we burying the dead in the ground? Iboilahu, kavur mishum. What's the reason of kavur? Is it mishum bizyoinahu? Because it's a disgrace not to bury the dead, right? The dead body gets, after a little bit of time, rigor mortis sits in, the body changes, it starts to decay, it looks weird, and it gets hard and heavy. And so it's disgraceful to keep the body. And that's why you have to bury the body, because of bizayon, disgrace to the dead, to the deceased, it's a disgrace to his family. Or mishum kaparahu. Or is it because burial leads to atonement? Right, when the body is decaying in the ground, that is somewhat of an atonement for the somewhat of a kapara for the deceased. So the Gemara says, "Lamai nafkamina." What's the difference if it's for bizayin or for kapara, for embarrassment or because of atonement? What will be the difference? So the Gemara says, "Here's the difference: the amar loy be'inon likura lahu gav." Someone who says he does not wish to be buried, right? The person says, I don't want to be wished. Say again? Okay. So if he says, I don't want to be buried, let's say a person says, I don't want to be buried. Do we have to listen to him? Now, this is obviously not going according to the Rambam. Right? The Rambam said it's a mitzvah in the Torah to be buried. But according to our Gemara that we left off, that seemed to be there is at least an opinion that says we don't have any Torah proof that a body needs to be buried in the ground. So let's say a guy says, I don't want to be buried. Do we listen to him? So if you say it's because of disgrace, because of bizayon, like kol kimine, then he cannot say I don't want to be buried, because by him being unburied, he's disgracing his family. And if you don't want to be buried, that's one thing, but you cannot embarrass your family. Yes.
Question. Don't we have a pasuk in Bereshit, from the ground you came, and from ground you were made, the ground you will return?
Very good.
There we derive.
Very good. That's actually the Iyun Yaakov's question. The Iyun Yaakov says, I don't understand. He says, K'tzas Kasha. He says, somewhat of a question. There's a pasuk that says that when Adam Rishon got cursed, it says, you eat by the sweat of your brow, and then it says, you will return to the ground. From the ground you came to the town, you will return. So there is proof, somewhat of a proof. You're right, and there's no really answer to that. But maybe that's not saying you have to be buried. Maybe it just says you will decay if you just left to the elements. Maybe you will be returning to the ground. And the person dies on the street or whatever.
It's the same thing. You leave a person on the ground kind of swallows him in.
Right, but that doesn't mean that there's a mitzvah to be buried. The pasuk says you'll go back to the ground in the natural state of things. That's what will happen. That's what will happen. But there's no mitzvah, a tzivoy, a command to be buried into the ground. That's possible, an answer to that. But that's a great question. That's a question that the Iyun Yaakov asked. That's a great question. Thank you, Avram. So if it's because of embarrassment, then he cannot say I don't want to be buried, because you're embarrassing the family. But if you say it's because of kapara, if you say because of atonement, then he can say, I don't want atonement. If he says I don't want atonement, then and if there is no mitzvah to be buried, let's say according to that opinion, then technically you don't have to bury him, because he doesn't want the kapara. Now we're gonna have to try to prove: is it because of kapara or is it because of bizayon? So let's start off with our first opinion, our first idea, first proof. Tashma. From the fact that the tzaddikim were buried, we're going to learn a proof, right? Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, they're buried. If you say because burial because of kapara, do righteous people need atonement? So the Gemara says, yes, yes. Adam ain't tzaddik. There is no person who's a tzaddik ba'aretz, in the land, on earth, who does only good and doesn't sin, right? This is a very important concept. It's very important because some people think, oh, this guy's a tzaddik. He's a huge rabbi. He doesn't have an evil side to him. That's not true. Kohelet says, Shlomo Melech says that there's no such person who doesn't have a sin. Now, there are 4 people who never had sins, but that's an exception to the rule. Nowadays, no one can ever say that. But even Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, for the greatness that they were, apparently they still could have needed a kapara. Now, this is very apropos and timely. Unfortunately, there was in the 5 towns, as well as in Yeshiva Shari Tzion, use lack of better terms, a scandal. And people say, how could it be? This guy was a huge rabbi, and you're hearing all sorts of things about him. And this is the truth. People have to remember that our Chachamim never tell us to blindly follow an Adam Gadol, and just because he's a great rabbi, that you follow him and you don't worry about him having a Yetzer Hara. The opposite, right? Our Chachamim tell us that the greater the person, the greater Yetzer Hara has. And his challenge is that he could defeat his greater Yetzer Hara. That's why he has that, but he does have it. In addition, the Gemara tells us that what's called Ein Apar Shabbos Ala Rayos. There's no guarantee, there's no protection against arayot, against forbidden relations. This is this sin of forbidden relations is sometimes too powerful, and that story in the Gemara about the rabbi who screams, there's a fire, right, in Kedushin, and he says, where's the fire? He says, it's in me. The Yetzer Hara wants me to go and sin, right? So this is something to keep in mind, and this is the famous saying, Kabideu v'chashideu. You're always supposed to honor everybody, but at the same time, you have to be somewhat suspect, and don't be naive, right? You have to be careful. Okay, so no proof from there. So because maybe they do need a kapara. So it's not a proof of the Zion because maybe they do need a kapara. Tashma. By Avia, Yeravam's son, it says they're going to eulogize him and they're going to bury him. Now if you say to bury them is a kapara, why is only Avia getting buried and getting kapara? Let his siblings also get burial, because they also need kapara. From the fact that only Avia is getting kapara, must be it's because of bizayon and not of kapara. So Gemara says, "Hi the tzaddik who teheve kapara, hanach loy leheve lehu kapara." The Gemara says not necessarily true. Just because he's getting it and not his siblings doesn't mean it doesn't get kapara. The truth is, it is for kapara. And the reason why his siblings are not getting buried, even though burial is for kapara and they really need a kapara, is that because they're not zochet to kapara, right? To have a kapara, you have to have a certain zahut for that. And they don't have that zahut. Therefore, they're not getting it. Tashma. So no proof from there, whether it's bezayon or
Who
or
are you talking about? You're talking when you say they, you mean the relatives in general?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Tashma. Lo yisapedu v'lo yikaveru. They should not be eulogized, nor they shall be buried. These are the people of Anatot, right? And if it's, why shouldn't they be buried? If they need kapara, let them be buried. So the Gemara says the lo tavelik kapara. So you see, they don't have the zechut for kapara. At all these cases, again and again, we have no proof of whether burial is for the disgrace of the family. That's why we're burying us. They don't want to embarrass the family, or burial is for the for the deceased, that he should be he should have kapara. The Gemara does not end off with a conclusion. Another Gemara here does not end up with a conclusion. However, Chachamim say that it's a mixture of both. That it's really both. Everyone agrees there's kapara. There's the kapara part of it. Everyone agrees that's true. The guy thought he was all this, and now he's put into the ground, and he's humbled by it, and his body gets decayed. That's all form of kapara. And there's also a bizayon factor. There's also an embarrassment factor by it. The fact that that the family doesn't have to go through his, seeing his decay. That is also true. So now comes the next Gemara. Where are we holding? I must have moved the page. Okay. Ibayilahu. A question is now a hesped. A hesped is the eulogy, right? During the Levaya, they give the eulogy. Why is a eulogy given? Is it given for the honor of the living, for the relatives? Or is it given for the honor of the deceased? Why are we giving a eulogy? Lamai nafkamina. What would be the difference? Which way do we go? The Amar loy tespudilahu gavra. If the deceased, before he dies, says, I don't want to be eulogized. If it's just about him, if it's for him, for his honor, then he can be mochel his honor. If it's the honor of the relatives, then he cannot say, I don't want to be eulogized, because it's not about you, it's about your family. Inami la puke miyorshin. Or so too, to take money from the inheritors, right? let's say the children don't want to pay for the levaya. They don't want to pay for the hesped. They don't want to pay for the eulogy. Can we force them to pay? Right? If it's for them, then they can say we don't want it. We can we wish not to have the eulogy, and therefore they're mochel that kavod, and they don't have to pay. But if it's for the deceased, then they cannot be mochel that, and then they are forced to pay. So which way is it? Is it for the honor of the deceased, or is it the honor of the relatives? So, Tashma, let's learn the proof. It says, "Vayavo Avraham lispod l'sara v'livkota." Avram Avinu finishes up with the Kedat Yitzchak, and he comes home to find his wife dead, right? And he eulogizes her. Now, she died while the Kedat Yitzchak was happening, and it took some time for him to come. If you say it is done for the honor of the living, and so Avram took some time to get there, is it right that Sarah's body gets disgraced while we're waiting for Abraham to come and give a eulogy? That's not fair. Where it says Sarah Gufa Nichala. No, Sarah wanted that her burial be delayed. So that Avram would receive honor through her. She wanted Avram to get honor through her. So it doesn't show us whether a hesped is for her or for him. In that case, she wanted him to get honor through her. So it doesn't prove one way or the other. Tashma. Again, this is Yeravam's son Aviyah. It says he'll get a hesped and he'll be buried. Now, if you say that it's because of the living, who was Aviyah's relatives? They were a Rishayim. Would he want to be honored through them? The hesped obviously is for him, not for them, because he wouldn't want his family getting honor through him. The Gemara says not true. Tzaddikim want other people to be honored through them, even if they're Rishayim. And therefore, Aviyah would want that his family be honored through him. So again, we can't really learn from here proof either, whether it's for the deceased honor or for the relatives. Tashma, lo yisapedu v'lo yikaveru. When it says by the people of Anatot, they're not going to be eulogized, they're not going to be buried, right? Now, if it's for the wicked, if it's for the wicked, if it's for the deceased, so it makes sense why you don't give them a eulogy. But if it's for their family, why are you taking away their eulogy? Their family is tzaddikim. So Gemara says, their families that are tzaddikim would not want to be honored through their Russia relative. So again, no proof from here of whether the hesped is for the deceased or for the living. Tashma, it says, this is about Tzidkiah, right? Tzidkiah was the last king of Judah, and he's actually exiled to Babylon before the destruction of the temple. And he gets a nevuah from Yirmiyahu, and there Yirmiyahu tells them, "Shalom tamut, you're going to die in peace. Like the burning of your fathers will be a burning for you, and you'll be eulogized." The burnings mean that we learned by the Malachim, by the kings of Israel and kings of Judah, you weren't allowed to use their kalim, their vessels after. They would have to be destroyed. So by you too, we would destroy your stuff so no one else can use them, and you would be eulogized. So you're telling him that you're going to be eulogized. If a hesped is just for the relatives, why is Yirmiyah telling Tzidkiah, right? If it's just for relatives, you don't have to tell him anything. The fact that the hesped will be, but it's not. It doesn't make a difference to him. It must be that it does make a difference for the dead, and it's not for the family. The Gemara says not necessarily. He's saying to him, Tzidkiah was worried that maybe he didn't reach his father's levels of tzaddikim, of being great people, of getting the same honor. And now he got a message from the Navi that he would also be a Zeichel Bracha, that he would be remembered for the good, for the blessing. And that for him was a big consolation. And that's why he was told that. So no proof from there whether a hesped is for the deceased or for the relatives. The Gemara tries again. Toshma. Nivze be'inav nim'as. This is a pasuk in Tehillim. Degraded in his own eyes is a worthy person. Who is this? Chizkiyahu melech Yehuda. Chizkiyahu melech Yehuda. Shigirer atzmot aviv al mitah shechavalim. Achaz, his father was a bad guy. When Achaz died, Chizkiah took his father's bones, put it on a bed of ropes, and had it dragged around. And this way he degraded himself in his own eyes. He got the praise of the Chachamim, of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, for doing that. Now, if and everything you do after the deceased dies, you're doing it for the people, my Tama, why did Chizkiah do this? Right? This is, if you're doing it, if the hesped and things you do for the deceased after he dies is for the people, why would Chizkiah do this? My Tama. It says, he did this to bring a kapara to his father. His father was a bad guy. He wanted him to get kapara, so he did this to him. And because of his father's kapara, he embarrasses the Jewish people by taking their king and dragging his bones around. The Jewish people were okay with this. They wanted Chizkiah's father to get an atonement, and they therefore were mochel, which means, again, you can't learn from this incident one way or the other because there was a different factor here, and you don't know if the hesped right now is for the father, is for the deceased, or for the living. So the Gemara is going to try again. Tashma, Omer Lahen. This is Yehuda Hanasi. Yehuda Hanasi is passing away, and he tells his children, Al tispuduni ba'ayarot. Don't eulogize me in the small towns, only in the large cities. And if eulogies are for the living, my nafkalemine, what difference does it make for him? What difference does it make if it's in a small town or a big town? It's not for him anyway. It's for the people that are alive. So it must be. It is for the dead. The Gemara says can't learn either or. Because Savar lityakaru beYisrael tape. He felt that the honor for the Jews is for the Jews to gather, right? Barov Am Hadrat Melech. It's a bigger honor when everyone gets together. So it's a bigger honor when everyone gets together. Therefore, it's not for my honor everyone has to get together, but rather for the Jewish people to honor themselves. So again, no proof from there. So now we're going to try our Mishnah. Our Mishnah itself, Tashma, Hilinu lichvodo. You're not allowed to. You're not allowed to let the dead be left overnight. But the Mishnah said, if you're doing it for his honor, lehevilo aron v'tachrichin, to bring the appropriate coffin, to bring the appropriate shrouds, ain't no over alav. Then you're not over alav lichvodo shalmeit. You don't go. You're not transgressing the prohibition. Why? My lav lichvodo shalmeit. Because you see, it's for the honor of the dead. So whatever happens to a person after he's dead, it's for the dead. So your hesped, the eulogy, is also for the deceased, not for the living. The Gemara says no. When it says lichvodo, lichvodo shalchai, it means for the honor of the living. So the Mishnah, it says lichvodo. You thought it means lichvodo shalmeit. No, it means lichvodo shalchai. No proof in there. Mishum kadosh shalchai. Does it make sense to, because of the living, because of the honor of the living, they want to have nice shrouds and a nice coffin at the funeral, that you're going to make the deceased wait? Is that proper? In Israel, they could even keep overnight everywhere in Israel except for Yerushalayim. Only in Yerushalayim you can't keep overnight. That's the halacha. So lichvodo, for his honor, is for the honor of the living, is it appropriate to embarrass the deceased by not burying him in order to honor the living? The Gemara says, "Ain, yes." Ki Amar Rachmana, the Torah says, "Lo talin nivlato al ha'etz, dumya de talui." It says in the Torah, don't leave him overnight hanging on the tree. Why? The ed be bizayon. because there is an embarrassment. It's degrading to be hung on a tree. Here he's in the morgue, or he's covered by a thing, or whatever it is. He's not hanging on a tree. It's not bizarre. No one sees him in degradation. He's just not around. You don't see him. He's in the morgue. So therefore, you're allowed to honor the living and delay the dead's burial, and that's okay. The Gemara tries again. There is a braita, Tashma, Halinu lichvodo. If you left the deceased overnight for his honor, Lishameh alav ayarot, so the crowds can get together. Lavi lo mikoninot, to bring the women who cry. They used to be professional criers. They used to come and cry at funerals. Now I don't know if we have professionals, but these were specifically ladies. We still have the ladies. They still come. They cry very much. They're supposed to bring they're supposed to break people's hearts at a funeral. They still do. Call it kavod. So they used to bring professional ones and pay them. They still pay them, Solomon?
Yes.
Oh wow. So exactly where the ways in the Talmud. You hire them, they would come, they cry, make everybody cry, and then you would pay them. So if, let's say, you can't get the ladies in on Sunday, they're already booked, whatever it was. So you can wait a day. To bring the coffin or the shrouds. Ain't over love. You're not over the sin of leaving it over. For anyone who does these things, he's doing it for the honor of the mate. It says the honor of the mate, honor of the dead. Gemara says, no, you have to fix up that braita. It means anything that's done for the kavod of the living that's not a bizayon for the mate. Meaning, as long as the deceased is not being degraded by waiting, then it's okay to do it for the honor of the living. But it doesn't say here that it's for the honor of the dead. Gemara brings another proof, and this is the final proof, and this is where we get our answer. Tashma, Rabbi Natan Omer, Simen Yafa Lemeit. There is a good sign for the deceased. Listen to this good sign. Shenafrein mimenu lahar mita. When punishment comes to him after he dies. For example, met shelon ispad veloni kaber nikbar. A dead person who didn't get eulogized or buried. It means eventually he gets buried, but all of a sudden something happens that the COVID comes and there's no chance for levaya, and there's no chance for a eulogy, and or a tornado comes or whatever it is, and you can't do it. Apparently that's a good thing. Or an animal comes and drags his body. If there's like a terrible rainstorm and it drenches his body and he can't make the levaya correct, and the kfura doesn't happen correctly. Eventually the kfura does happen, so the Parshim say, but it doesn't happen on time or on schedule or something like that. This is a beautiful sign for the dead body. Why? Because he gets punished in this world rather in the world to come. So someone wanted to say yesterday that so if you're going from the levaya to the Beit HaKfura, you're going to the cemetery, and all of a sudden there's unbelievable traffic, and you're stuck in like a 3-hour traffic. And you're like, oh, yeah. No, it's even better. You want to get stuck in traffic because now he's waiting to get buried. All that time is a what's it called? A kapara for him. Apparently, it's a siman yafa. Now, you can't plan it that way. You're supposed to bury it as soon as possible. But if it does happen, that's a siman yafa. That's what the Gemara says here. So shma mina yakara de shachvehu. That is for the honor of the deceased. Shma mina, learn from this that the hespedim, the eulogies, and stuff that are done after the deceased body, after the person dies, is done for the deceased. Therefore, the halacha is a hesped is for the honor of the deceased. And if the deceased says, "I don't want a eulogy," we acquiesce, we listen, and we do not eulogize him. Now, a person cannot say, "I don't want to be buried." That we don't listen to him. We do have to bury him, and the Rambam says it's mitzvah Torah. But a hesped, it's for the covet of the mate, and if he says he doesn't want, he doesn't need to have it. You don't give it. There are those who say that if he's an Adam Gadol, he's a big Talmid Chacham and everybody knows him, he's a prominent person, then he doesn't have the right not to say, I don't want to be eulogized, and we eulogize him anyway. There are those who argue on that. But the pashtus, the halacha is, the way Shulchan Aruch brings it, is that a person says, I don't want to be eulogized, we listen and we don't eulogize him because it's for his own honor and not for the honor of the relatives. Someone had a question?
If you
Okay, go ahead.
Okay. Based on the material that is presented right now, it looks like the atonement begins from the moment that the person passes away.
Correct.
So why is it the delay to put the body into the ground considered as atonement, but after that it doesn't? What's the difference in terms of time frame? Wouldn't
you're
the
asking,
atonement I think still continues even when you put the body into the ground?
Right. So you're asking basically the Gemara before. The Gemara was saying putting him into the ground, is that an atonement or not? So the truth is, we said that Chazal say it is an atonement. Everyone agrees that it's somewhat of a kapara. Now we're learning that any disturbances, any delays, anything that happens until the burial happens, that's also a great form of atonement.
What's the difference? Unless there is a difference of atonement in itself when you are outside the ground and inside the ground. Maybe that is the only explanation.
Yeah, it seems to be that when you're outside the ground and things are happening to you, that it seems to be a greater atonement, a greater kapara than when you're inside the ground.
Okay.
That's what it seems to be saying. Yes.
And second, second, remember we were studying one Gemara where Elisha, I believe, killed the children who came out from the forest, like the animals came in and killed them.
Yeah.
Because of
their mothers were nidas when they did it on Yom Kippur. Yeah.
So how do you connect that to this? When the animal takes the body away.
But that was different. They were alive when the animal did that. That was a full punishment.
Yeah, that was the cause of their death. Yes.
Yeah, that was the cause of their death, and they didn't get buried, so they didn't get any kapara. That's not a kapara. The kapara here, by the way, it's not that the animal takes the body and eats it up. The Mepharshim say it means the animal just drags the body. It doesn't do anything to it. It just moves it around. But the body must eventually get buried in order for those disturbances to be considered a kapara. The body needs to get buried. If the body doesn't get buried, then it's even worse. It's a simon yafa if stuff happened, but not to the degree that the body gets, eaten up by an animal or, whatever. It has to be buried eventually. That makes sense?
Yes.
Okay. Someone else had a question? So
no. So
no.
The whole process of eulogy is the one that
Ephraim was going first. Ephraim, you want to continue?
Okay. So the idea is we want to bury him as soon as possible, but as long as we start the process, it already starts the whole
seems to be. It seems to be. Once you start the process, it seems like a kapara already begins.
Exactly, kapara. Okay.
Right.
All right.
And it seems that if delays and things happen, it means it's done on purpose in order to give him more of a kapara in this world before he goes to the next world. That's what it seems
From Shemaim,
to be.
you mean? From Shemaim?
Yeah. That the Shemaim is helping him out to get his kaparas here, so he doesn't have to get the kapara in the next world.
That's why the soldier who wants to go up as fast as possible.
That's true. No, we're saying that's true. We still want to bury him as fast as possible. But if it happens, that means Shemaim is giving him a kapara before he comes up.
But the longer the farewell, the better for the soul.
Right, but it has to be done not on purpose. You cannot plan to go during rush hour. But if it happens all of a sudden, then that's good. That's what it seems to be. Okay. Avram, you were saying something?
Yeah, I was going to ask if the body got devoured by animals. It's a bad siman?
Pretty much, yes. And the question here say, when it talks about an animal dragging, it means just dragging it and not eating it. So apparently if it eats it, it might not be such a good siman. Okay. We have a little bit more to go. Let's see if we can finish this up. Another piece of interesting Gemara. Let's see. The Mishnah said that when the person who got stoned he doesn't get buried right away in his ancestors' burial spot. Rather, by Betin, there were two cemeteries. For those who got the punishment of skila, of stoning, and sreifa, of burning, went into one cemetery, and those who were punished with the sword or with strangulation went into the other cemetery. Now, the Chol Chach Lama, why was this? Why couldn't you bury him straight in the family's place? Why you had to bury him in the Beis Din's cemetery? The Gemara says, "Lefisha ain't kovrin Russia etzel tzaddik." You're not allowed to put a Russia next to a tzaddik in the cemetery. It's also. Minayin. From where do we know she'ain kovrin Russia etzel tzaddik? We don't put a Russia next to a tzaddik. Listen to this. It's so phenomenal. Gemara. Listen to this. Shnemar. You talked about Elisha and coming back to Elisha. Vayhi heim kvarim ish. There was a ish. Rashi says it was a navi sheker. This was a false prophet, and he died. Right, the whole story would happen. Anyway, he died, and they were going to bury him. And when the people went to bury this false prophet, they saw the enemies coming, so they just threw him. And they threw him into a grave. And whose grave was it? It was Elisha's grave. Elisha. And this man, this dead body of a Navi Sheker, he touches Elisha's body that's in the kever, and he gets alive. He gets alive. Vayakom al raglav, and he got up on his feet. And Rashi explains what happened. He didn't get up and live forever again. What happened was Hashem made a miracle that this man should get up on his feet, walk away, and go into a different kever and die there. Because you're not allowed to put a Russia next to a tzaddik. Therefore, Tchilat HaMeitim happened to this guy temporarily in order for him to get up on his own feet and walk to a different grave and not die in the same, not be buried in the same grave as Elisha. So what do you see? You cannot bury a Russia next to a tzaddik. An incredible piece of Tanakh, an incredible piece of Gemara here. The Gemara says, "Amalei Rav Papa," but maybe that's not true. Maybe it wasn't in order for him to get up and walk away. The Dilma maybe maybe it's the double portion of Elisha. What does that mean? When Eliyahu Hanavi was dying, Elisha was a student. Elisha said to Eliyahu Hanavi, "I wish to do twice as many miracles than you did." And right, Eliyahu says, if you can see me dying, if you see me going up to Shemayim, you will get that double portion. Now we know Eliyahu Hanavi, he revived one person, and we have in Tanakh that Elisha revived one person and brought him back to life. But we don't have the second one. Maybe this one, when Elisha's already dead and the body touches him and gets back to life, maybe that fulfills the pasuk that Elisha would get the double portion of Eliyahu. So Amar Lei, they said to Rav Papa, Ihachi, we learned that this guy didn't get up and go home. He just got home He just got up temporarily to walk out of the tzaddik's kever to go into a different kever. So that's not considered tchias amesim of pishanayim of a double portion of Eliyahu. Because when Eliyahu revived and this person, the guy lived for much longer. So did Elisha's first one. So what does this mean? So where is the double portion? How do we see a second time that Elisha resurrected someone from the dead? The second time wasn't an actual revival of a dead person, but rather she repet Sarat Naaman. Naaman was a Gaisha general from Aram, right? He came to Elisha, and Elisha said, "Go into the certain river and go in there, and you'll come out Sarat free." And he didn't want to listen. And then his servants told him, "Why don't you try it? What you're going to hurt?" And he went and he did it, and he came out Sarat free, and he healed it. And we know that a person has sarat is like a dead person, right? There are 4 people who are considered dead in life, and one of them is a mitzora. Don't let her not be like a corpse, right? In Devarim, in Bamidbar, Aaron says that about Miriam when she has sarat. So you see that sarat is like mita, is like a death. So when Elisha cured Naaman, it's as if he revived another person, and that was his pi shinayim. All right, we'll just do a little more, and then we'll take any questions at that point. Shame. In the same way, Shein Kovin Rasha Etzel Tzadik, The same way you're not allowed to bury a dead next to a tzaddik. Kach ein korban Russia, chomer etzel Russia kal. The same way you're not allowed to bury a terrible Russia, a level 1 Russia next to a level 10 Russia. A level 10 is like your extreme Russia. Your level 1 is your like just beginner Russia. You're not allowed to bury them next to each other. Even though the Sha'im have their own levels, and you got to bury them accordingly. That's why the Beit Din had 2 cemeteries. One for the Skila and Srefa, which are more Chomer, and one for Herig and Chenek, which is less, which is more Kal, right, for more weaker sins. So you don't mix Rishayim, right? Even in our cemeteries, they try not to mix Rishayim with the Rishayim. You have to put the levels correctly. As the Gemara says, we need to kun arba kvarot. So let the Beit Din have 4, one for Cherig, one for Henig, one for Srefa, one for Skila, each one separately. Why do we have 2? The Gemara says Shnei kvarot, Gemara gimilela. It's a halacha Moshe Missinai. Moshe Missinai says all you need is 2. You don't need 4 different cemeteries. Therefore, the Beit Din only had 2, but the idea applies. And someone told me on Shabbat, they said that he says that's what they do today in the Beit Kvarot. They look who you are, they ask who you are, and what type of level of religiosity you are, and based on that, they bury the people in different places. And someone's a Russia, and there's a Russia Gomer, and there's a Russia who's not so bad. He's somewhat of a Russia. They try to make those distinctions because you're not supposed to bury them together. And my reasoning, for me, it was a little interesting because a lot of times we say, you have to spend time by Rishayim, and you should, try to influence them. So I was thinking, in life, it might be different than in death, because in death, that's your final real estate. You're not going anywhere after that. So in such a case, you got to make sure that you're in a good spot, that you're with the right people. On life, we come and go, we move from here, we move from there. So maybe it's maybe you can get away with being next to a Russia, but in death, apparently Chachamim put a much stronger emphasis about that. And maybe that's the whole etrog, right? The etrog is representative of the tzaddik, and during the na'anuim, you take him out, right? You put him with the lulav during the na'anuim, and afterwards you put him away. Okay. Any questions?
With Elisha, there was a case when he sent his students. Do you remember?
I can't hear you well.
Okay, give me a second. Let me turn away.
You're very like echoey.
1 second. How about now?
Now I can hear.
Okay, with Elisha, there was a case when he sent his student to revive someone. Remember, and that,
right,
but he told him not to say anymore. Since he started to brag, it didn't work. But the idea was he would have been able to do it. Just because he himself didn't do it, he sent somebody else to do it.
Right, but it still wasn't him, even though he gave him the power to do it.
Right, but if you are able to relay that power to your student, isn't that even higher madrega?
Maybe. I'm not sure. It's not the way the Gemara seems to understand it. But that is a good question.
Okay, and nowadays when we kind of bury, ideally people kind of buy their burial location at the cemetery beforehand.
Right.
So how would you know what I mean?
They should look where they're burying. They should try to find the spots where good people are buried, if you're a good person. I know of stories in Eretz Yisrael, like when there's like a regular person dies and they wants to be buried like in a cemetery where the Rosh Hashivas are, and where those sort of people they don't let, they say it's not appropriate that you're buried next to the Gedolim. They have their own spot. And that's the idea, that you have to be within your own people, your own crowd.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Any questions? That's it for today. We finished on time. As Hashem, I'm not sure if next week's going to be shir. It might be, might not be. Okay, I might be away for Shabbat. So if I'm going to be away, maybe if I'm away, but I'm not going to give share. I'll keep everybody informed. Okay.
Sounds good. Thank you.
All right. Yasher koach, Shavua tov l'kulam. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Bye.